a fair bit of both of my last two books, but I would say particularly the last one, Beyond Order, the new one, is what would you say, encouragement to people to watch themselves, to pay attention, not to think, but just to watch. It's like, and so one chapter is called, I think it's chapter 5, is called Do Not Do What You Hate. And what does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean, geez, I hate getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning to get ready for work. That just means that you're not very disciplined, or maybe that it might mean something deeper. But I'd start with lack of discipline before, rearranging your whole life. Because you might say, well, I hate getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning no matter what I'm doing, and then it's not your job. I don't mean don't do difficult things. I mean, watch yourself, and if you see that you're doing things that make you hate yourself, then consider the cost of continuing. Just notice, because you're reporting to yourself, just like you just said. In some sense, that wasn't a voluntary decision. You noticed that you couldn't breathe unless you discussed this issue. It's like, well, why is that? You don't know. You can't control it even. I mean, you can not do it and pay the consequences, but you can't say to yourself easily, well, that's stupid. I should be able to breathe. Just because I haven't said this thing, that shouldn't stop me from breathing. But there it is. And the wise people that I've read, often associated with the establishment of the Christian church, actually, this seems to be something that was a continual topic of discussion, noted continually that we do things that we can't control, and we're subject to forces that we can't control. And those are forces that are associated with our own destiny, I suppose, certainly our own conscience. And you just have to watch. You find out who you are. I'm the person who has to say this. Why? I don't know exactly. But I know that if I don't do it, there's going to be a price. I had 3 clients, all whose political beliefs, by the way, ranged across a wide spectrum, all of who'd been bullied to the point of breakdown in their workplace. And they kept being asked to do things that violated their conscience. And, partly they didn't exactly know how to, you should stand up, but it's not that easy. And it's not that easy to figure out when you should do it. But you should do it when, if you're going along with something that violates your conscience, then you lessen yourself. You're starting to pay a big price then. And so at some point you have to think, and this is something I walked through with my clients all the time when they were trying to make a decision. Everyone looks at the costs of making a decision, but almost no one looks at the costs of not making the decision. And the reason for that is you're sitting there right now and the sky isn't falling on you. And so you're not calculating the costs of sitting there because nothing's happening. And then if you decided to do something different, you might calculate the costs of doing that, but you've already zeroed out the costs of inertia. But they aren't zero. There's no zero cost. There's risk here and there's risk here. And you don't like that idea because you want security, and no bloody wonder. It's no wonder you want security. But when you're making a decision, you need to reawaken the costs of inertia. I mean, those are opportunity costs, let's say, something like that. There are ways they are formally considered, but just going along as you are when everything is changing around you is also a costly decision. And so if you know that, you think, well, there's danger here and there's danger here, then that, weirdly enough, that frees you up, because then you can pick the danger that you prefer. Now, the price you pay is the realization that there's no security down either road. And you have to wake up to that now and then in your life. It's very unpleasant. It's not surprising people don't do it. But again, the costs of failing to do it are worse. In chapter 11, which is do not allow yourself to become deceitful, arrogant, or resentful, it's kind of a summary chapter of everything I've ever written, I would say. I kind of outline the reasons why people become deceitful, arrogant, and resentful. And we have our reasons. It's in some sense, it's a miracle that it doesn't happen all the time. And so I say, well, here's the problem. Death chases you, you're mortal, and illness will be a part of your life and a part of the lives of people you love. And it will be terrible, maybe beyond your imagining. you're stuck with that, man. And culture, there's a tyrannical aspect. It crushes you and turns you into a cog and maybe destroys the best in you to some degree. You're stuck with that. And then Christ, you're just a massive contradictions and trouble. You can't get yourself organized. You're doing all sorts of things you don't want to do and not doing the things you know you should do. And, putting obstacles in your path just so you can trip over them. Well, there's the landscape. Well, why would you turn to the dark side, let's say, in the face of that? It's like, no wonder, obviously. But it doesn't help. It seems to make everything worse. So, and it doesn't seem, if you're objecting to the fact that things are bad, it doesn't seem that making them worse is a tenable solution. It's an attractive solution at times because people think deeply. Oh, to hell with this. It's so awful that I'll just add to the misery out of spite. And man, if you don't see the compulsion of that argument, either you're not, I don't know, maybe you're fortunate. You're sheltered. Maybe you're saint-like. That would be good. But it and you see this in clinical practice all the time. Voluntary confrontation with what is threatening and unknown tends to be curative. And not always. There are mistakes people make. So for example, you often see these trauma teams rush in to talk to people just after, say, a mass shooting or some kind of terrorist attack. And it does not help people to have them review the trauma that they're currently experiencing. Not unless it's problem solving oriented. It can just make it worse. But if it's an old memory, well, then voluntary recall and explicit reformulation seems to be useful. Or at least it's better than anything else we know. His proposition was that every ideal is a judge. And that makes perfect sense because an ideal is something to which you aspire. And the gap between you and that ideal, if it's your ideal, is felt as judgment. And so that's one of the reasons people are very afraid to have an ideal, to make it. That's why I wrote, do not hide things in the fog. It's like, well, you should lay out an ideal. You should pursue an ideal. Why wouldn't you? Well, when you make your ideal explicit, it turns into your judge. Well, then you can listen to that judge and move forward and transform. But, it's pretty damn harsh. Because especially to begin with, you posit an ideal, especially if you're in a mess. God, every bit of you is being judged as unworthy.
One of the things that you wrote was really powerful for me to read because to me, I think it described my snitch, my round chaos, that thing that I'm seeking underneath the games that I'm playing. And so I'm going to read this little snippet here. Who could you be? You could be all that a man or woman might be. You could be the newest avatar in your own unique manner of the great ancestral heroes of the past. What is the upper limit to that? We do not know. Our religious structures hint at it. How would someone who determined to take full responsibility for the tragedy and malevolence of the world manifest itself? The ultimate question of man is not who we are, but who we could be. That's it for me. I mean, for me, I read that, I was like, yep, That's it. There's the snitch with its wings and its golden, mercurius allure that I'm really chasing underneath all of this. And I enjoy all these other things, but
who could you be?
Exactly.
You see that in children. I watched little children play, and what they're doing, they're attempting to grow forward, but they toy with identities. My little granddaughter, I wrote about her in this book too. It's so funny watching her. She had Pocahontas, the Disney movie, and she had a Pocahontas doll, and she watched that movie a number of times. And then it's been a year now. She's only 3.5. For a whole year, she has two names, Scarlett and Ellie. And one's her middle name, but she's called one or the other, and seems to be perfectly comfortable with both. If you ask her if she's Ellie, she'll say yes. And if you ask her if she's Scarlett, she'll say yes. But if you ask her if she's Pocahontas, she'll also say yes. And then if you ask her if she is Scarlett, Ellie, or Pocahontas, she'll say she's Pocahontas. And she's been insisting on that for a whole year. And so she's playing out this role. I don't know how much of her imagination is devoted to it, but enough for this trip. Like that's, if you're, how old are you? 40 something?
Just turned 40.
Yeah, okay. So, imagine that you had a fictional identity for 15 years. That's approximately the same relative length of time. And the kids, they weave up a fantasy world, and then they play out an identity in that. And then they weave out another fantasy world, and they play out an identity with that. And they shape that identity by their interactions with other children and adults. And hopefully they find an identity that suits them, that other people also accept. Because your identity has to be something that other people accept, or it isn't going to work for you. But that's all part of this exploration of who they could be. It's the play is in fact the exercising of that realm of possibilities.